Hey, friends! Your old pal, Barkey J. Dog here, back with another movie review. Well, February is behind us, and aside from presidential birthdays, February is best known for Valentine's Day. You know, where people give flowers and candy and greeting cards and have intimate dinners. Romance is in the air. Oh, sorry, that was a fart. Well, this time we're taking a look at an interesting picture that not only has romance, but incorporates a little bit of time travel as well. That's right. We're talking about Somewhere in Time from 1980. Now, one of my viewers, Hunter, he very kindly sent me this here Blu-ray off of my wish list. Thanks, man! It's been a long time since I screened this one, so let's check it out. Our story goes like this. It's 1972, and newly minted playwright Richard Collier has just finished college, and his latest play is in the running to go to Broadway. Looks like he's on his way. And during his celebration, a mysterious old biddy shows up, gives him a pocket watch, and utters 4 words: "Come back to me." Then she leaves, and Collier doesn't know what it's all about. Flash forward 8 years to 1980, and Collier is in a slump. He's had some success, but is stuck on his latest script. So he decides to get away from the city and go back to the town where he went to college. He stays at this fancy old-school hotel, where he discovers a portrait on display of a beautiful woman. Turns out she was a famous actress who played at the hotel's theater back in 1912. Collier is so taken with this woman, and who can blame him, am I right? Holy cow. That he begins researching her story. It turns out that she was Elsie McKenna, a leading light of the theater, and it also turns out she became the old Betty who gave Collier the watch. Collier talks to one of his old professors at the college who wrote a book claiming he had once traveled through time by self-hypnotism. The professor states he wouldn't do it again due to the strain it put him under, but Collier is determined to try it so he can meet Elsie. So he does, and it works. He arrives at the hotel in 1912 to meet the woman of his dreams, but he doesn't know anything about the era or its customs, so he sticks out like a sore thumb, and people generally think he's kinda weird. But he does meet Elsie, and she falls for him, of course. This despite the best efforts of her manager to try and put the kibosh on young love. Will Collier win Elsie and live happily ever after? Who's paying the rent on his swanky Chicago apartment while he's back in 1912? And what's up with this guy? In our cast, we have some big names. Christopher Reeve was just off the massive success of Superman and wanted a project that was about more than just muscle-bound heroics. Luckily, he got a gander at the script for Somewhere in Time, despite his agent initially turning it down. And he's perfect for this thing. His boyish, earnest innocence and optimism, his humor, which made him so perfect to play the last son of Krypton, is on full display here. One of my favorite scenes is when he stops by a rehearsal at the theater and looks on in amazement as the actors going through their lines do it in what, to contemporary audiences, would have seemed a laughably stiff and hammy acting style. I mean, that's right up there with him looking at the payphone in Superman. It's so meta. And then we have the incomparable Janyne Seymour as Elsie McKenna. Seymour brings an innocence to her character, and you can see why Collier is so smitten. She's probably one of the few actresses whose sheer beauty could have given Hedy Lamarr or Gene Tierney a run for their money. She's gorgeous in this, and the Edwardian fashion and hairstyles fit her perfectly. Christopher Plummer plays her manager and overall handler. He pretty much runs her life and wants to create an ideal perfection of an actress by his standards. He's also somewhat precognitive, having predicted that a man would change her life and take her away from her true calling, the stage. He's good in this. Kind of a villain, kind of not, but he's the heavy, so he could go either way. The sort of role David Warner would also have excelled at if he had been cast, but Plummer is more urbane, and that's what made him perfect for this part. The old man, Arthur, who works at the hotel, was played by character actor Bill Irwin. He was in tons of stuff, mostly on TV, but appeared in movies as well, such as Jet Pilot with John Wayne, Home Alone, and Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Susan French plays the old Betty. She was in Airport 1975, Jaws 2, Flatliners, House, she played the grandma in that, and The Hindenburg, which I've reviewed elsewhere on the channel. Teresa Wright plays the old Betty's companion. She was a true legend, appearing in Shadow of a Doubt, The Best Years of Our Lives, Mrs. Miniver, The Little Foxes, Pursued, and Track of the Cat, those two with Robert Mitchum. And if you look fast, you'll spot William H. Macy as a theater critic. Meg Ryan pops up in the background at the library where Collier is doing some research. And the late George Wendt would have had his film debut in Somewhere in Time as a student, but all of his scenes got cut. Finally, the author of Bid Time Return, the source material for the film, appears in a cameo in 1912 as the astonished man who sees Collier leave the men's washroom after a poor attempt at shaving. Richard Matheson based his story on his own experience when he saw a portrait of the famous actress Maude Adams, a beauty of her day. She also had a sort of handler guy. Like Christopher Plummer's character, he died on the Lusitania. Matheson was so taken with this portrait, he wove a love story about a man traveling back through time to meet a woman like Adams. This was a very tight-knit cast and crew, everyone giving their all for the project. In fact, the love story itself was kind of real, as Christopher Reeve and Janyne Seymour quietly began having it off. Unfortunately, life got in the way when Reeves' ex announced that she was heavy with child, and so the pair had to break it off. But because they were having a romance, it comes through when they look at each other, and it makes the story feel so much more real. When Collier turns and sees Elsie's portrait for the first time, Reeve didn't want to see it until that moment, so it was covered until he turns and is drawn towards it. So that reaction was real, and when we see the picture being taken later in 1912, we understand her expression in the portrait. The production had planned on a budget of $8 million, but the studio didn't think the movie would work, so they cut that in half, down to a mere $4 million. That meant cuts across the board and challenges for everyone. The original hotel in the book was too modern-looking at the time, so the filmmakers opted for this hotel in Michigan instead. It's on an island where people aren't allowed to use any motor vehicles, so the cast and crew had to use horse and carriage and bicycles to get around, and it was too expensive for them to stay at the hotel itself, so they had to room across town. But it was worth it, as the hotel becomes a character in its own right in the film. It was a fantastic location, lending itself to a trick the director used, posing extras in the background to mimic paintings from the Edwardian era. Legendary composer John Barry was suggested to score the film, but they didn't have the money to pay a guy with his status. But Janyne Seymour knew John Barry. They were friends, and she asked if he'd do the score, which he happily did, turning in one of his most understated but most beautiful works, based on a Rachmaninoff piece which we hear in the film. It's very different from his usual James Bond stuff. The time travel here is interesting and original, and there are rules to it. Collier can interact and even cause events, but not change them. The portrait, the pocket watch, everything, it all comes back around. And the process he uses to travel in time is not simple. Collier has to work at it and figure it out in order to make it happen. Or does he? Did he really travel through time? He was trying to hypnotize himself after all. What if he just imagines he traveled? He wakes up in a different room, but he could have just walked down the hall in his hypnotized state, so that's not proof. At one point, he gets the idea to look in the old guest registries of the hotel, and sure enough, he sees his name written there in 1912. But his name is Richard Collier. I mean, it's not like that's an uncommon name, right? There are probably several Richard Colliers in Chicago. It's not as if he were Francis Egbert Schleplotnik the Third. Maybe he just imagines this looks like his signature. Remember, he's hypnotized. So is he really there in 1912? Or just imagining he's there? It's such a tantalizing question inherent with this method of time travel, one we've not really seen before. The only thing I can think of even remotely like it is John Carter mentally transporting himself to Mars. In his case, it's more like astral projection, and he inhabits the body of a man already on Mars so he can get with the sexy princess. Yeah. But Collier, supposedly, wills himself physically through time to 1912. Even the pocket watch the old biddy gives him isn't really evidence. She gives him the watch. He takes it with him to 1912, where Elsie remarks, "Oh, that's nice. She had never seen it before." So she didn't buy it. She hangs on to it and gives it to Collier in 1972. But who bought the watch? It's a pretty fancy one, too, but where did it come from? All we know for certain is that traveling this way is a terrific physical strain and can have detrimental physical effects. Also, what keeps him in 1912? I imagine he has to maintain his concentration, right? So when he takes a nap, why doesn't he go back to 1980? If his mind wanders at all, why doesn't he go back? And if he dies in 1980, what happens to him in 1912? Does he just stay there? Or if he gets hit by a cow or something else in 1912 and dies, does he wake up in 1980? Or is he just dead? But of course, none of these questions really matter. He's in love. So in love, he finds a way to travel back in time to meet the object of his affection. How far would you go for love? Man, if that were possible, if I could will myself to go back through time for love, let me tell you, Betty Page better watch out. I tried it once, but I just fell asleep. Believe it or not, this movie flopped hard. Critics hated it, and it lost money. So, in a way, the studio was right. Then a funny thing happened. After running on cable TV and videotape, the film's audience discovered Somewhere in Time, and it quickly became a favorite. Shades of Big Trouble in Little China, am I right? As good as this film is, Somewhere in Time, I'm afraid, is not for the Twitter kids, the Tumblerinas, the Blue Sky crowd. Why? Well, in the first place, they have the attention span of a gnat that's high on cocaine. They couldn't sit through this movie because it isn't a razzle-dazzle action fest with video game style editing. No, this movie is, admittedly, slow, but slow in a good way, the best way. It takes its time, unveiling events, revealing layers and moments slowly so they can be savored. They'd hate that. And then there's the casting. The Tumblerinas will complain that the cast is not a rainbow of fruit flavors. And they'd get upset that there are no obvious cross-dressers or trans characters. In 1912. No, this was made in the before time, when people were more normal and lived normal lives without all of the hang-ups the Twitter kids have inflicted on themselves. They'd hate that too. And then this movie is a romance movie. And there's few things the Tumblerina hates more than romance. They don't want romance in their movies. They can't see the value. They'll say Reeve is a creeper, a stalker, and Plummer is a control freak and part of the patriarchy, keeping poor Elsie from realizing her true potential. Mind you, these are people who really believe their cat loves them, when really it just wants to be fed. People so maladjusted and broken, they don't go anywhere or do anything, don't have real relationships, and all of their friends are just avatars on social media. Not the kind of people you could call at 2 a.m. because you're in a jam and need some help. Because they spend all day on their phones, scrolling their feeds instead of interacting with anyone in real life, they don't know what love is. They've made themselves so bizarre and toxic that no one wants to be around them, let alone loves them. So what do? You can't have a relationship with your phone, after all, but that doesn't stop the Tumblerina from trying. They'll go ahead and put their phone on vibrate and shove it down the front of their pants so they'll get a thrill when it rings. But since they're unlovable, the only calls that come in are from debt collectors, trying to get them to pay something on the student loans they took out to get that gender studies degree. So they probably buy a second phone, just so they can call themselves over and over to feel a thrill in their pants. The late 70s and early 80s, there's just something about the movies made in this time period. They were written for adults. Sure, there were action pictures and dopey comedies and lousy films and all of that, but many just seemed to be grown up. And they expected the person watching it to be mature, not still acting like a petulant, spoiled child in their late 20s or early 30s. Or their 40s. They just assumed the viewer could parse things and think for themselves and put things in perspective and context. That they had some level of intellect and introspection, or at least they were grown up enough to understand a few complexities to find the value in a good story. Not the case today, of course, where movies are literally being designed as background noise for people scrolling on their phones. So they repeat the plot at regular intervals so the story somehow registers enough to make it through the viewer's self-inflicted attention deficit disorder. Ugh! Somewhere in Time gets so much right, and over the course of its running time, we see a love story blossoming before our very eyes. This movie is magical. It has a great cast, a great location, sensitive direction, the look of it, the feel of it, despite the minimal budget, despite everything. It all just comes together in a sweet and lovely way. Well, there's no way around it. I'm just gonna call it. I'm giving Somewhere in Time 4 paws up. You take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next one.